Okay, so hi everyone. Welcome to our quantitative history webinar today. So my name is Liang Liu, and I will be chairing today's session. And today we have Professor Li Ming from UCLA to give us a talk on his research about quantitative and qualitative change in the archaeological study of early modern China. And before we start, let me give a brief introduction about Professor. So Professor Li's major field of research is the archaeology of prehistoric and Bronze Age China, focusing on state formation, social memory, storytelling, placemaking, and religious and social responses to climate change. And he also studies the maritime archaeology of the Asiatic trade in the early modern time, using research on ceramic production and trade in coastal China and Southeast Asia to document the transformation in material culture brought by the early global trade. And join us together today is Professor Jiu Chen from University of Hong Kong, who will later on be our discussions for this talk. Just so you know, if you have any questions, you can keep it in the Q&A part until the end of the talk, and later on I will deliver this question to Professor Li Ming. Okay, so without further ado, let's give a warm welcome to Professor and listen to his talk.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the invitation by this Hong Kong University, the Quantitative History Research Center. And it's great pleasure to share my research with you. I have to admit that quantitative research is not my strong suit, but I will try my best. My effort here is to investigate these major changes that marks the kind of a threshold, critical threshold in early China, where here is a list that's provided by AI, artificial intelligence. When you ask these questions, and now, doesn't matter what civilizations you are dealing with, is usually this list of attributes that archaeologists look for quantitative analysis. And for qualitative ones, certainly there's a saying that once we have enough quantitative change, once it built toward a threshold, we may enter a qualitative change. But some of these qualitative change, which we cannot measure, is not built on quantitative development. Okay, so it could be brought in through cultural exchange, and it made critical contribution to a conceptual vision of civilization. So these attributes, we cannot measure their influence, their impact in quantitative ways. Okay, so it's presence and absence, yet later on, it created new realms of social action or artistic ritual traditions like ritual music that has quantitative attributes, like the bells, the chime stones, which are hallmark of Bronze Age elite persona. So as a more traditional archaeologist, I try to reconcile these two, okay? And what are the quantitative changes we can measure? And what kind of attributes we use to measure? And what are some of these challenges? And then what are these qualitative change? And how to reconcile these two? Okay, so first of all, we have to think about this quantitative measurement of a society as not only a product of a modern science, social science especially, but something almost like a statecraft, something that ancient kingship, knowledge of state, they are interested in, okay? And so the idea of quantification and kingship, the political authority, they are closely interwoven. So that is something that we have to investigate. That is, even though we are looking at ancient societies, it doesn't mean quantification is a modern temptation. And then we look at the archaeological attributes. That's the kind of quantitative research that's relevant to my inquiries. I have done quantitative research on Bronze Age animal bones of the Shang outpost. For my dissertation, I have done quantitative analysis of colonial consumption of Chinese export ceramics in Southeast Asia. But when I choose to do quantitative analysis, those data itself are well defined, okay? So I don't have to struggle with my main narrative. But in terms of looking for the rise of early Chinese civilization, I want to be very honest with you of the challenges we face and also potentials we face. So we're looking at these qualitative change versus quantitative change, and in the context of issues that scholars have raised, like Casey Chang explore the idea of continuity and the rupture, and also in material culture studies, we always have to look in the realm of continuation, legacies of the past, the traditions versus innovations. So these different attributes are closely interwoven. And then finally, I will talk about the challenges we face when we work on regional, macro-regional, inter-regional issues. That's what's the scope for Chinese archaeology. We are dealing with the size of a European continent. So we have to reconcile with these regional variations and different geomorphology patterns. So all of these things that make our data not so neat. Okay. So here, I was quoting the Native Indian historian Vine Deloria Jr. on the kind of intuitive knowledge of Native Indian communities with their environment, with their landscape, how their history is tied to these different places. And these places then connect to their realm of cosmology and their sense of identity. So if you read this, it's basically a spatialized history, and you remember the past, you transmit the past through storytelling. And these are rich in ethnography, but it's very difficult to quantify. Okay, and you can study these indigenous groups in terms of their subsistence strategy, their resources, their exchanges. Those are wonderful, but when we need to approach their cultural conception of things, it's very difficult. It's something we would call emic knowledge, the knowledge that's inherent to culture themselves. And then we have to then look at these cultural, the emic classifications of Chinese society, since every society has this, especially as you move into emerging social complexity, emerging political authority, state bureaucracy, there's a temptation to see people, to see the landscape in terms of numbers. Okay, so this is not a modern social science phenomena. This has been in the past. So here you have early imperial or late Bronze Age narratives about record keeping, classification using knots, using ropes. And you see major things with bigger knot recorded in bigger knots, and the smaller matters is smaller knot. So as you very much familiar. This has been practiced by Inca Empire in very sophisticated ways of record keeping bureaucracy without the use of writing. So, but unfortunately, archaeologically, we can't go that far back to see traces of this. Clearly, these are not invented by historians. This would be memories of the remote past. And in the Wuliang Shrine, this is early imperial mortuary art, and you have this commentary next to the mythical figure Fuxi, mentioned that he's the first one established notions of kingship, and he used divination and rope cord knots to manage the realm. So this narrative clearly is there. And then as we go into the early classical sources, like Shangshu, the venerated text, this famous chapter of Yu Gong, the tribute of Yu, gave us a wonderful notion of landscape, political landscape, economic resources, classification of landscape. The date of this particular text has been disputed. And most of modern historians consider that as a 4th, even 3rd century BC kind of late Warring States invention, if not early imperial. And scholars like Wang Guowei, Shawan, Grenay, it dates the text to Western Zhou period based on its linguistic pattern. And Professor Shao Wangping and I have argued that these could have a much early root. Is more of a vision, a blueprint for state building. Nevertheless, it gave this particular text, beside its narrative of these tribute routes, landmarks, local produce, it gave a very comprehensive and concise classification of the soil and resources. Okay, so you have this chart over here. Here, this category is soil quality of the 9 regions, and then field, and then produce used for tributes, and then plants, tribute routes, and then specific inventory of goods. Okay, so here, Huang Fumi in this early imperial sources, again, showing that there's census numbers that's deriving out of this tradition. And Grenade has a very interesting argument about this. That is, this indeed is rooted in prehistorical shamanism. And then later bureaucracy, which is manifested in this quantitative aspect of the text. And then the esoteric part of shamanistic dance, later embraced by religious Taoism. So Confucianism, bureaucracy, and Taoism, esoteric dance, the both emerge out of this kind of knowledge, okay? So here are the examples of this classification, upper, middle, lower level. So it doesn't matter how difficult we work with quantitative analysis, this idea is inherent to Chinese civilization since its inception. So here is a kind of visualization of these agricultural field qualities. So far, I have not been able to come up with a pattern. And these dotted lines showing tribute route, I have spoke about this in many other lectures, and all the tributes from the 8 regions move along this river toward the Jinnan area, okay, in southwest Shanxi. So that's where the capital is located. And then these arrows depict the order of the narrative of the landmarks of the 9 regions. So it comes in double circles. This is observation of Professor Li Ling, and they intercept at the waterfall. That's the Dragon Gate over here. So this revealed that this text is not purely bureaucratic and quantitative, but it has an esoteric and a performative aspect. In later imperial bureaucracy, administration, rational bureaucracy, quantification are incompatible with that esoteric shamanistic dance. Okay, so but nevertheless, here it's all merged together. That's what makes things interesting. Again, this is the different category, is the the text scheme. Again, you see 1, 2, 3, and 4, 5, and then jump to the west, 6, and then 7. Again, I don't know what's the rationale behind this system. And nevertheless, this is very important system that influenced generations of scholars in imperial China. Also in this text, it has the system of 5 fu, the 5 tiers beyond the capital. Okay, so the hinterland has the following tribute obligations, and the more distant peripheries have other obligations. So again, is a spatial classification, has quantitative implications, and many anthropologists has used this chart, including Marshall Solins, to depict the Chinese mind, and also argue how impractical the system is. But think about this. This is really a blueprint, a philosophy of kingship. Okay, it's what things should be. And then you have to reconcile with the realities. And then this system gets embraced and modified in other Zhou classical texts like Zhifangshi in Zhou Li and various sources. When you look at them and here's a population, it's much more simplified and you don't see the esoteric part anymore. So over time, it became more and more rational. And the most important region of the 9 is Jizhou, which is outlined by the U shape of the eastern loop of the Yellow River. And in this Confucian text, the Xiaodai Li Ji, you see people actually use this 3 side of the Yellow River as the reference point to measure the size of Chinese cultural realm, size of the empire, basically. And you can see from East River to West River is less than 1,000 li. And then from West River to the Dunhuang, those deserts, is about over 1,000 li. And once you visualize this, it look a picture like this. Okay, so this is using the 3 sections of the Yellow River as reference point to understand the scope. And this is just to try to give you one snapshot of the Chinese kind of geography, political geography, and how influential it is for imperial philosophers, geographers to envision their world. So it's a device for word making. And once you compare that with actual archaeological examples of quantification, you realize at least 3,000 years ago, the royal administrators, scribes are much more sophisticated and much more sophisticated knowledge of their kingdom and states. Here is an example of early Western Zhou bronze vessel. Famous one in the National Museum, has inscriptions documenting this particular lord gets transferred to a new territory, where it mentioned the king, likely King Cheng the third king, he visited the map room. Imagine a map room and containing where he viewed the conquest of the Shang, the maps documenting King Cheng. Sorry, this should be the fourth king. So King Cheng and King Wu. I think that we might have a little bit of dispute here. The first two kings conquest the map, okay? And then he inspected the map of Eastern territories. And then he stood at the location of the new territory to be granted to the Lord of Yu, and then made the investiture address. And that started with a series of gifts. Some of these gifts are conquered jade, like the second one. Some are weapons. And then it has a detailed account of the numbers of the land. Some of the units are missing, and then numbers of settlements, and then numbers of subjects. So this reviewed, even by the standard of Western Zhou, early Western Zhou, the Yugong texts are already, very abstract. So 3,000 years ago, in the central government in Zhouyuan, the Zhou kings indeed have much better census data. And this is something that we would love to have. And then you have periodically, you have the Liaomin, census taking, especially when the state in episode going through episodes of crisis. You need manpower for your army, you need resources for state building. All of these gave us a sense of, quantitative thinking in Bronze Age. So the idea of Shanghai Jing represents Chinese notions of its landscape is not precise. It's these numbers actually coming from the bronze inscriptions are much more reliable. So as we move into archaeological quantification, so that's the Attic classification. Attic in opposition to Amic, that is, Attic is from modern observers. So we're interested in chronology. Those can be quantified. The site numbers, density, and then the size of these settlements. So these can all be quantified. And just before this lecture, I was having a chat with Professor Chen, and is talking about the other more precise numbers that you can always get if your archaeological data, survey data is precise enough. For example, the age of the deceased, the wells from the tomb, the size of the skeleton. So indeed, we have a sliding scale in archaeology. Some are absolutely quantifiable, some are difficult. Okay, so what's the type of numbers we're looking at, from my perspective, are settlement data, which is a little bit difficult, but still, once we have a comprehensive look of the information, we could get some objective observations. So here, I want you to pay attention to this notion of archaeological palimpsest. So palimpsest is those medieval, even Greek writing medium. So these are sheepskin, and you write on it because it's very expensive to have these sheepskin. So you can recycle early manuscript. You erase it, and then you write it again. And paper made that obsolete, of course. Nobody really recycled paper by erasing it that much. So as a result, on the surface of the writing medium, this leather, you have the imprint from different period. That's what an archaeological landscape is like. Okay, so how, as archaeologists, you face a major challenge. That is, the patterns you observe, are they real? Or they involve some kind of preservation, discovery bias. So as a professional archaeologist, you need to be able to distinguish these two. Okay, is a real archaeological pattern, the absence of something is a real absence in the past, or it is a result of a lack of research, or a result of flood deposit covering the site, deposition. How do we deal with this? So one way to control the quality of your data is to have a comprehensive understanding of site distribution of every period. Okay, so for example, I don't study Yangshao, the Middle Paleolithic, Middle Neolithic that much. Yangshao society is fairly egalitarian and it's about 5,000–6,000 years ago, but I'm interested in the population, the scale, because I use it as a control mechanism. If we have thousands of Yangshao sites has been documented, and then the absence of Bronze Age sites, say maybe they only come in hundreds, then that pattern is real. Because it's unlikely you find all the prehistorical sites, yet systematically miss later ones. So now you understand why I pay attention to this multiple component. So then the following topics, 5 or 6 of them, I'm just to look at the major thresholds in Chinese archaeology and basically tell you what I hope the quantitative data could help resolve, help us to move forward. So in this presentation, it's not about I show you a few examples of my own quantitative research to show you how I have done it. Those are indeed very simple. It's mostly histogram, numbers, but rather I find it more informative to have this conversation between more traditional approach I'm taking and where quantitative research would bring this kind of research to a different level, okay? I'll go them one by one. So here are the Yangshao sites. And we know they are very large. The Nanzuo site has recently been excavated by Han Jianye of Renmin University, is like 6 square kilometers. And many of these large sites at Zhudingyuan in Lingbao, that's the heartland of the Yangshao society, are, varies from a multiple, from 1 to 3 square kilometers. These are massive. And then, in Guangzhong Basin, in Jinnan Basin, the same thing. So Yangshao, it's very easy to find them. But when you speak about the social stratification and trying to quantify them, Yangshao present a great challenge. That's many of its burials are secondary communal burials. It's hard to see individual. And when you actually had an individual here, very few grave goods. And yet the size matters. Look at how massive the site is. Okay, so these are the questions I'm really interested in. Let's start with Liangzhou. The question would be, how did this prehistorical city emerge? If we use the more traditional methods that I have studied at University of Michigan, we would, start a survey in Hangzhou area to with assumption that Liangzhou emerged with a kind of a long regional evolution trajectory. Okay. But when you look at the geomorphological record, like Zhang Yijie and other scholars, Liu Yan, you realize this coastal plain, in terms of geology, is very new. There's not many sites there. There's not many people live there. It's not even fit for human inhabitation. And it was here in the Lingjiatan area in Anhui, where before in the 4th millennium BC, there's a great cultural development. And there's also a great concentration of wells, as you see the Lingjiatan burials. So now the consensus seems to be that this Liangzhu development is kind of a migration from the Chaohu area and to this newly emerged coastal plain. So a regional survey would help us to understand this interregional dynamics. That is how Lingdachan emerged, and then how the Ningzhen area fall into some kind of decline, where the population migrated to Liangzhu. So the surveys would help us to understand, the emergence of the first metropolitan city in prehistorical China 5,000 years ago. And it has enormous influence. And then the next thing that we could measure would be the scope of its civil engineering, starting from its central mound, which is 30 hectares, which is huge, probably the largest single building before the Great Wall, and also these many canals and the causeway and the hydraulic projects. And then as archaeologists, we are confronted with these gigantic projects, yet we have no way to, well, we have ways to measure the volume of construction. Okay, there are many examples. Xie Li has done that, and many other scholars have worked out formula. But in terms of water management, what is the size of irrigation it could supply, and how does that translate into agricultural surplus, and how does that translate to this aura of this great city? That is something that we would very much benefit from sophisticated quantitative analysis and the modeling, which eventually, led to this is probably a good example of how quantitative changes contributed to this qualitative change. That is the emergence of this enormous city. The size varies, from 30 square kilometers to 70 square kilometers. And the core area is about 3 square kilometers. That's within that enclosure. And then within these, you have this repetition of this iconography in elite tombs, in its jade object, ivory objects. And this almost look like the Polynesian god Taki, a supreme god. And it's not seen before, and it probably had very important contribution to later development. And in the Middle Yangtze, similar development happens. Liu Jianguo has produced these maps about irrigation in Qujialing and Shijiahe. Again, we have these wonderful remote sensing data, and based on traditional methodology, we could figure out the labor investment, and then we need some modeling to see how this hydraulic engineering would contribute to the centralization of the society. And in Shijiahe, we can't even talk about a centralization of society or even urbanism, because what you see is a massive congregation of people engaging in these ritual activities, figurines, and mass consumption of alcohol in these tiny cups which could come in 250,000, 500,000 size. And those, again, translate into something else, something not looking like a urbanization or commerce or state formation, but these urban spectacle performance, and these in the forms of these spiked cylinders, one connecting another into these very tall columns, which probably is the prototype for these Bronze Age Yangtze river representations from the Sanxingdui all the way to the Wuyue regions of Lower Yangtze, has been pointed out by Professor Lang Jianfeng at Shandong University. So how do we, assess these changes? How did this quantitative development contribute to a new vision of urban life? One thing, in terms of measuring the quantitative change and elite persona would be these pig mandibles. So here is the peak in terms of numbers in Neolithic China from the Huangshan Cemetery about 5,000 years ago in the Nanyang Basin. So this is a jade working community, which probably account for the source of its wealth. And also you can see from the quiver and the battle axes, these are elite warriors. So the mandibles number to about 400 of them. So these will be curated. So this probably come from the feasting activities sponsored by the deceased and then curated through their life and then buried here. And this is a great number to measure social persona because it's widespread. It started as early as 7,000-8,000 years ago at Peligang tradition in the Huai River Basin, and has continued all the way into early Bronze Age. In some areas, even survived much later. But in terms of sheer number, this is the peak. And then we're going to see how this quantitative change eventually would disappear. And once we go into the Bronze Age, like you see in the Shang tombs, is often cattle legs or sheep legs. So yeah, that represents a different notion of ritual offering. And we're going to observe these qualitative change, these threshold in the Longshan period. And the major place here we can see is Taosi and Shimao, and also those sites in the Yang River like Wangchenggang, Wadian, which is smaller. So the major ones are what I call these capital cities of the highland Longshan society. That's in the orange area, where houses and the shop boats in the size of 3 to 4 square kilometer in scope. Okay, so here is probably the last of that particular very resilient, long-living ways of presenting, curating these pig mandibles. Okay, so in Taosi, you have second-tier tombs, elite tombs, has up to 200 of them displayed on the ledge. So before the discovery of Huangshan Cemetery, this is actually the peak here. And it's very interesting that this is the period when the highland Longshan society is engaged in interactions with the Eurasian societies beyond China. And this is when cattle, sheep, and all these trappings of Eurasian steppe Bronze Age society was introduced. So here you see the resilience of a Neolithic notion of wealth, and that's also quantifiable. And they didn't incorporate these new elements, though Gao Jiantao's excavation has shown that cattle bone indeed show up in the palace area. Another exciting attribute for quantification is the massive size of the Taosi cemetery. Okay, it was estimated as having 10,000 tombs. Half has been destroyed by erosion, and then about 2,000 has been excavated. And this is unprecedented in size. In Wangyin Cemetery in Dawenkou, or in the Mogou Cemetery in Gansu, You have one's number in 1 or 2,000, but 10,000, that's a huge number. And also, these cemeteries, these tombs are so much densely packed. And you have many, many tombs dug into each other. The highest concentration have almost 200 tombs overlapping each other. And this is unprecedented in Chinese archaeology of any period. So what is causing these major congregation of population? As you see these tombs, they are all oriented to the southeast, toward the sacred mountain in the back. So here we might be looking at a qualitative change, a major change in religion or maybe pilgrimage activities where people are coming together in a rapid fashion, and it manifests in these quantitative attributes that have never appeared before or after. And then we see these changes in the top tier tombs, very elaborate display of pigs feasting. Most of these vessels are to show you how to proper cook the pigs and display them. Culinary knives, cutting boards, large platter. So these, yes, they're quantifiable. And also at the same time, they represent a different conception of an elite persona. Is what makes an elite. You need to have access to this type of information and not just having somebody cook this for you, but you need to be almost like a culinary connoisseur, a master. But also, so pigs still matter, but here in the top tier Taosi tombs, it's not the numbers of mandibles that count, is the actual pigs unconsumed, split, usually 10 of them, and then properly displayed. But still, food is something everybody understands, but Taosi also marks a qualitative breakthrough in the musical tradition. That is the appearance of these massive chime stone. The meter wide is made of stone coming from the mountain over here in the background, where all the tombs are rented to. So I visited the quarry with Gao Jiangtao and his colleagues to look at the very source of these musical stones. When you tap them, they make a beautiful sound. And although the Tao's jade working can produce jade almost as thin as 1 millimeter, like a paper you see through, the surface of the chime stone are deliberately kept. Okay, so the decor is not the matter. As you know, in later period, in Anyang, in Zhou period, even in Han period, these surfaces are beautifully polished. Some even tiger carving, relief carving, but no, those are quantitative change in terms coming as sets. And the qualitative breakthrough, it happened here, okay? So in Chinese terms, those can be considered 锦上添花, okay? But from absence to the first appearance, this musical sensitivity, yes, 4,000 years ago, over 4,000 years ago at Taosi is really important. And other sects is also never show up before and never appear again. So that involves the earthen drums. So they're very tall. And and then these alligator skin drum. And according to Dr. Stromberg, our recent PhD, now doing a postdoc at Yale for musical archaeology, this represents the first set of stationary musical instrument. That is, previously, all the instrument is handheld. It can be played by an individual. But here is like a concert, okay? They are stationary. People sit together, play this. And Some of these instruments, like the alligator skin drum, has appeared in Davenport and Longshan sites and in Shimao. But some of these, like these earthen drums, is unique. So this setting, again, in terms of a qualitative change, is very important because in late Bronze Age classics like Zuozhuan, you have the Wu elite Jizha commenting on these concerts that's played on the odes. And he gave comments one by one. When he reached the music of the Tang area, which is the Shanxi area, his comment is making a reference to the pre-dynastic polity of Taotang. That would be equivalent of the Longshan period. So the idea of the pre-dynastic Taotang society over 4,000 years ago in southern Shanxi as a fountainhead of classical music was probably widely accepted by these late Bronze Age elite. And we have to ask ourselves, why? What contributes to this major breakthrough? And then people talk about all the time. So here you have examples of the first metal objects from Taosi. Okay, some are mimicking jade objects like this. Some, like the toad, probably fitting of shamanistic dress, which could have Altai northern origin. Toad is a favorite motif for shamanism because of its psychoactive property, the poison. But you have the first bell in East Asia. According to my colleague, Professor von Falkenhausen, this is the first bell in the world, and no weapons. So clearly, metal has been used for ritual purpose. Again, here is the Middle Period tomb massive display of pig feasting. So what's absent are the cattle here. Okay, so you see a moment of change is not just have native resilience or cultural conservatism, and also selective incorporation of trade goods from outside, like coral shells and copper, but also innovation, cultural innovation that lay the foundation for later Bronze Age elaboration. Okay, at Shima, you see similar thing. Again, is almost experimental and syncretic in the creation of this new ritual, possibly a pilgrimage center, massive mounds, and these relief carvings. I'm sure many of you are familiar with this. And then there's a major quantitative aspect of Shimao, that is the huge amount of jade has been unfortunately looted from here. And many of these jades, so here is the distribution of these jade produced by Professor Deng Cong of Shandong University. And when you look at these pieces at Shimao, you see all these displays, they are modified from the Chong cylinder, okay? So clearly, after the collapse of Liangzhu, the diaspora resulted in the spread of these jade cylinders in all directions, and then people are repurposing them for different reasons. So out of these, many of these things in this case, you are seeing both numbers and also qualitative changes. That is, the objects could be old, and you could calculate its numbers, but in terms of its ritual use, is new, is not just a simple elaboration of past rituals, and we have to understand why. And also in Taosi, in Shimao and Taosi, you see these motifs. Professor Wang Zhenxiang identified this middle Yangtze jade piece at Shijiahe area. It can fit this Taosi toad right in the middle. And also here you see at Shimao from the elite cemetery near the central mound, and it almost like a pig snout over here. And it at 3,000 years ago, that's so 1,000 years after, when you look at this chime stone from the Hunan Ningxiang area, you can almost trace this stone one in it as its prototype. So are this Ningxiang famous vessel with a human face. Many people instantly remind them of the motifs. So in these cases, these are really important qualitative changes happening in these highland Longshan centers that has important contribution to later time. And then when you look at the development of the chime stones and the bells through the Bronze Age society, that's when you trace it, it traces to Taosi and Shimao and this highland Longshan period. So this is a period of innovation, and the prototypes are fairly modest in size, like the bells, but it mattered. It's a major watershed for this kind of musical sensibility. Again, those chime stones are massive in size, but they are not graded. And now they come into this elaborate graded set. So we have to also think about, of course, writing. If record keeping is an important strategy of quantification, of state management, when did it start? Okay, Taosi gave us a good clue for possible origin of that. And then a major study that has captured the fascination of many scholars from Shi Baolin Sebiu to Zhang Li, Luan Fengshi, many scholars, and also Zhang Li's professor, late Professor Liu Xu, is this idea of collapse of Longshan society. So I'm taking this from Shi Baolin's dissertation 10 years ago. Is based on the national survey data, where you see this massive decline of sites, both in numbers and in scope, in scale, in the Central Plains, okay, from Longshan period to the Archaeological period. And you see a big gap here, is not because this gap is not a real gap, okay? This is the gap in archaeological data. And as you know, these national atlas, national survey are done across national regional boundaries. So the data is not consistent. And this shows us example of how archaeological classification matters in terms of our analysis. And just now, when I use the word highland Longshan society, I'm lumping this gray area all together. But in terms of our archaeological practice, these are often separated. This part is called the Central Plains, and this part will be called the northern area. So what I'm trying to say is the archaeological classification has to adapt to the realities of the past. Okay, so as a result of that collapse and the reconfiguration, and you have the emergence of Archaeological as a new early Bronze Age center, and it cannot account for all the population that's lost elsewhere, okay? So here is the survey data that's published by Liu Li, Chen Xingcan, of their Yile River survey. you see there's not many sites in prehistorical period, and then boom, Archaeological period, and then decline in the Shang. And then in the Zhou period, it rebound. Okay, so here is something that's quantifiable. And the data is an accurate reflection of the emergence of this early Bronze Age city. But then there's a question, that is, when this research was done, the paradigm was based on the Michigan political evolutionary model, is regional based. Okay, so the idea is to look at the changing distribution of sites over time within this basin. The basin is about 70 kilometers long, and then to see how Archaeological emerge as a result of these interactions, political competitions within the basin. But then we have a problem. That is, if we are looking at Archaeological, the rise of Archaeological based on this type of scale, okay, the massive interregional interactions of the Longshan period, then in what way the regional data just specific to the Luoyang Basin itself can explain the rise of Archaeological? These are processes of a very different spatial scope. Okay, so that's the kind of challenge we face. And as we look at Archaeological, you know, we call it early states, but what are the evidence of bureaucracy, administration? Instead, when you look at the tombs, it's what's being emphasized is the power of dance, bells, jade clapper. These are attached to the body, and these make sound in movement. And these turquoise mosaic inlay and coral shells. So all these is almost shamanistic in character, not bureaucrat. Okay, so we should not just use the term state. We put it on Archaeological and expect that the administration just exists because we call it a state. And also, beside these badges usually associated with bells, and you have the first bronze vessels. Again, this is really a qualitative change, because previously you never have these cooking vessels produced in bronzes. And from this moment on, once this qualitative change, this hurdle is crossed, it's continued elaboration to the graded set of Bronze Age China, as represented by the 9 bronze vessels. So this is a critical moment. And this moment also have other implications. You know, some of these vessels may have hallucinogenic property, and what are involved in making these qualitative change. We have to look at these ideas. In what way ideas, visions has been introduced, experimented at Archaeological. So what accounts for the major change from Longshan to Archaeological period? Well, one hypothesis that's put forth by Dr. Wu Qinglong of Beijing University is very dramatic. Okay, so he basically argued that around 1920, there's a massive earthquake happening in the Jishishan area over here, and the mountain collapsed and resulted in a massive quake lake. And eventually, once the natural dam collapsed, it unleashed enormous flood to the society in the Middle Yellow River. I find, as a social archaeologist, I have to practice some kind of restraint from this single episode explanation. But I'm interested in geomorphology. So I'm interested in the possibilities of these nature culture intersections. So I went with him to explore this area last year, and indeed, this area is geologically extremely unstable. And the Lajia, this site, has been buried by these landslide and hit by the earthquake. It's right down here. And then a few months after left, this place get hit by a major earthquake again. So to evaluate this hypothesis, of course, we need to look at the geomorphological evidence, which he carefully spent 2 days to show me. And also in terms of quantitative research, we could build modeling to see, okay, if we have a quick lake stopping Yellow River for several months, what's the volume of this river, of this lake? Okay, and how big, how tall are the surrounding mountain valleys, so that if the river, if the lake level reach that area, it would flood to other areas. So these are something that quantifiable. Okay, so now into the Shang period, what I'm puzzled about the transition from Archaeological to Archaeological is the Xia Qiyuan culture, the pre-dynastic Shang in the north of the Yellow River, east of Taihang. The population is so small. There's not even a Xia Qiyuan city has been documented, or a large cemetery. Okay, and you have Liuzhuang cemeteries, but none of them are really big. And then suddenly Zhengzhou is about 15 square kilometers. And Arlito is about 3-4 square kilometers. So if you move everybody from Arlito into Zhengzhou, that's not enough. And also Zhengzhou is also preoccupied with expansions. So it has to have population going to different directions. So this is something I don't understand. Okay, is this quantitative change from the urban size of Arlito to Zhengzhou is like a huge leap. And in terms of material culture, Arlito used Ding tripod. Zhengzhou use Li tripod from the highlands area. So that is a qualitative change. It shows these two polities are not a single regime, single cultural tradition. In terms of bronze metallurgy, that is a quantitative change. So it's probably the Arlito artisans work for Zhengzhou masters. So the shapes, the Arlito vessels are this big and Zhengzhou's are maybe a meter. So Arlito, it made the threshold and just continued. So in this case, Longshan and Arlito most important. And then I want to show you this qualitative change in terms of architectural space. This is produced by Professor Sun Hua of Beijing University. So here, when you see this vessel, you can say, oh yeah, Arlito is totally capable of making that. And you have the technology, you have the ceramic prototype for this. And here is the vessels, okay, get brought down from the Taiyuan Basin to Henei Xia Qiyuan culture, and then to the Central Plains, south of the river. Here is Professor Sun Hua's proposal of a spatial shift. That is a qualitative change, okay? Arlito is over here. The palace goes this way, the red. And all of these Arligang, Inshu cultures, the elite architecture, urban planning, elite tombs is all about 8 degrees east of true north. So that's consistent. You see the blue line is consistent. And from Arlito to Arligang, there's a break. So in this case, this would support a Shangzhou transition. And then what happened to the Jinnan Basin? During the Taoist period, there are massive sites, often in 1 square kilometer, 3 square kilometers, Once you enter the Bronze Age, it's much smaller, okay? And Dongxiafeng was 20 hectares. And now Xiubi, a much bigger site, was discovered and was 1 square kilometer in the Longshan period, again, gets smaller in the Bronze Age. So that is the population decline is a topic we need to investigate. And only once you have good control of settlement numbers, densities, scope, every period, then you can appreciate how dramatic this decline is. And on the highland area, after the Longshan period, so that's after the Shimao era, also there's major population decline. Okay, in the Bronze Age sites, the numbers are not comparable to the Longshan period, the highland Longshan period. And nevertheless, a recent archaeology has revealed there are elite and political center present here. They also have great interactions with the Gobi and the Mongolian steppes in the north. So in a sense, when you look at the pottery, you realize there are continuity. So when you look at continuity, you think it's important to think about this quantitative change. So here are the maps produced in Cao Dazhi's dissertation. If you put Longshan sites on here, that could be massive in number. But so far, we don't have a distribution map of 2 periods, so we cannot understand the transition. And also, these periods are all Li Jiaya sites. That's a late Shang period. So what happened between Shimao and the late Shang, that part is hazy. But nevertheless, you have this particular cemetery that could host cemetery that could date to the early Shang period. So we know there are elite activity presence, and we know in terms of ceramics, there are continuities with the Longshan tradition. So in this case, yes, the Longshan tradition is still there. And recently, there's major discovery at Zhaigou, which I visited last year, have these massive tombs. And with the presence of chariots coming from the north as a qualitative change. And this change also manifested in Anyang as well. And some of these artisans could come from Anyang. And once you look at this, I'm not trying to show you the technical and cultural elaboration on the highlands. I want to show you, with the presence of this, why the Jinnan Basin was empty. During the late Shang period, the Jinnan Basin was really, really depopulated. There are few cemeteries like Jiuwu and Fushan Qiaobei. According to Professor Liu Xu, they are all on the western slope of the Taihang Mountain. They're not in the basin. The basin is virtually empty. So why that's the case? Is it because of warfare between Anyang and these highland groups? And these shows good interactions. So these are the questions we don't understand. But based on the historical geographers of late imperial China, you can see the Qiaobei area, the Qingjian area, it could control the food of the Hedong area. So this area has a strategic link between the Ordos area and Hedong. So I'm trying to use the presence of this to make you draw your attention to the absence of major cities in the Jinnan Basin. And then in Anyang, you see these could all be considered elaboration. So these are quantitative change from the article Article tradition. Writing is a major breakthrough, okay? But is this a quantitative change or a qualitative change? Is writing invented in the late Shang, or it was only used in Archaeological and was preserved during this period. So this we don't know. It could be a Taoist period invention, and it just never preserved well. And it could be otherwise. And then also Professor Rawson and Cao has noted, this is the period the horses gets introduced. Okay, coming to the end. These are the period, the issues that we could quantify in the Western Zhou period. That is the depopulation of the Shang heartland. That's one. And then the rebuilding of Luoyang Basin, the early Tao homeland. As I told you, in the late Shang period, that's a big drop in population. Okay, with the presence of early Tao as a peak, you can understand how dramatic the absence of the late Shang. And the Jinnan Basin as well. Even though we don't have a good map, everybody is familiar that there's no major cities in Jinnan. And the writing has been expanding. And another interesting phenomena is the dramatic depopulation of the highland area. What happened? I mean, yes, the Zhou fought against the Shang, but why the highland area gets depopulated? This factor is not known. And only in the late period is increased again. So in the Guangzhou Basin, you have continuity of the Longshan tradition. These will be the Longshan period. You look at it, it looked the same as Taosi and Shimao and Gansu. And during the late Shang period, you see continuity with these jade objects. It could come from Shimao, could come from Arito. And the conquest goes through these virtually empty basins. And then after the conquest of the Shang, there's an enormous reconfiguration of political landscape with shifting of population to the Zhou centers in the Guangzhou Basin, Luoyang Basin, Jinnan Basin, and also to Zhou military colonies established in the Shang heartland. And yes, the size of the Zhou city can be measured. It's fairly large. And the whole production apparatus from Anyang was then relocated into the Zhou cities. This has been studied by Zhao Hao's dissertation. And the use of writing, we have archaeological example to show it has widespread. It's like an expansion of writing. So this is a quantitative change that changed the character of the Zhou civilization. And of course, these Shang elite scribes like the Wei family has a major contribution to the spread of literacy. And some of that map room I was talking about could be affiliated with this temple. And then for these two virtually empty basins, the Zhou placed new cities. Here's a Luoyi, here's a Tang, in the name of returning to the past, ruins of the Tang, ruins of the Xia. Okay, so Luoyang Basin was considered the old place of the Xia dynasty, where they constructed Luoyi and has major elite cemeteries and the bronze workshop here. And here you see the historical narrative about building the city in the name of the first dynasty. And then once you compare this chart, you can understand, here's Archaeological, here's the Zhou city, the late Shang's big gap. So the idea of the Zhou going to the old city of the first dynasty, it makes sense because there's no Shang legacy here. And in the Jinnan Basin, the state of Tang, granted to Lord Tang Shuyu, was discovered in the Jinnan Basin as represented by the site of Tianma Chucun. This site is 11 square kilometers. That's very large. And then if you compare the settlement map, the Longshan period, you see is an interesting palimpsest. The Longshan period has many, many large sites, but early Bronze Age, no, not many. Okay, the early Bronze Age is either absent or very small. So it's similar to the Archaeological situation where you see almost like a supernova, superstar in the Longshan period here. And then 1,000 years later, the Zhou reconstructed the city, the basin population. And some of these population were probably relocated from the highland because
Sorry, Professor, sorry to interrupt. As we'll shortly move on to the discussion part, and I think Zhu is already very excited to discuss it with you with these slides. So if you can just quickly wrap up your
Sure, I will wrap up
presentation.
this. Okay, so much of this is result of population shifting and also depopulation of Anyang, population gets sent away. And then there's good archaeological report for it. And then finally, the fall of Western Zhou in the loss of Guangzhou city would introduce another quantifiable phenomena in terms of urban trajectory. That's what I was hoping to study in the summer. And finally, in order to study these rise and falls, there are some challenges. One is geomorphology. That's the Yellow River became much more unstable in historical period. Okay, that leaving very thick deposits in the eastern part of the Central Plains, which would cause our data to be highly biased. And when I asked my professor, Jeff Parsons, about this, because this regional survey came from the New World, Latin America, Mexico, and Peru, and said why these data are so precise in your area and the people challenge the credibility of these data in my area. Because of the landscape change, irrigation, agricultural activities. He told me something very surprising. That is, after the arrival of Europeans in the New World 400 years ago, there were major population decline. Okay. Also in the New World, there's no tracked animals in before colonial period. So these two reasons caused their archaeological deposit on the surface to be well preserved. And then I realized it's for the same reason the colonization of the New World made the Chinese archaeological landscape much more unreliable. Because with the introduction of the New World crop, and the population growth of Chinese society in the last 400 years, agriculture and all these activities, the landscape gets covered, disturbed a lot more. So this recent modern phenomena is something that's making the New World data and the Old World data very asymmetrical. Okay, so that's my conclusion. So yes, I'm open to discussion now. Stop share.
Yeah, thank you very much. You might not see me up, but I'm just waiting for my camera to function. So yeah, so let's welcome Zhu to join the discussion now. Yeah. Okay. So Zhu's camera's function, so I'll just get myself disappeared. Yes, Zhu.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you, Zhang. Thanks also go to Professor Li. So Professor Li has done a wonderful job, especially he prepared this presentation just for our quantitative history webinar. And then given that we usually focus on the use of quantitative methods in historical research, so he really made special efforts trying to link the quantitative approach together with the more traditional qualitative approach. So I'm really very grateful for his efforts preparing for this talk and also for giving such a wonderful talk. But of course, one central question that Professor Li tries to address is, from archaeological work, what typically archaeologists can get would be just material remains, the physical objects. So how much can we actually learn, either quantitatively or qualitatively, from the physical objects about the prehistory and history of development, whether we're talking about economic development, social development, or other indicators of human development. We only have those material remains that can be excavated and presented to us. So what can we do? What can we really infer? But of course, Professor Li has summarized wonderfully both the nice contributions that can be made even using quantitative methods and applying them to material remains, but also the challenge that we face there. I have to say that given that we have just a few minutes left, probably I think at the end of the day, based on our limited experience, it really depends on the research questions you may have, because sometimes, depending on research questions, you may be actually surprised by how far you can actually go in quantifying, archaeological discoveries and the material remains. For example, in my recent work with Wang Wanda and Peter Turkin, we use grave goods, in particular grave weapon objects that archaeologists have uncovered for periods going back to the early Neolithic, as well as the mid-Neolithic, late Neolithic, and then the Bronze Age, as well as the Iron Age years. And in particular, in our exercise, we needed to know needed to find some measure of war frequency or war threats for each region during the different time periods of the Neolithic as well as the Bronze Age period. So we were initially, challenged very much, but then we came up with this measure based on the number of excavated grave weapons by archaeologists. We use that as a measure to proxy for the war threats each region or the people in each region may have faced during the different time periods from the beginning of the Neolithic to the end. And then similarly, if you are interested in studying the prehistory and evolution of human inequality, such as wealth inequality, archaeologists and also my colleagues, we have come up with many different ways. Some archaeologists use the size of excavated homes, the square footage of excavated homes for each family as the basic unit, and then compute the Gini index or some inequality index based on the house size across a number of families or individuals. So that, and then you can use that Gini index or house size inequality measure to examine the evolution of wealth inequality from the early Neolithic to the mid Neolithic, late Neolithic, all the way up to the Western Zhou period or even later periods. And then my colleague, Dr. Li Dongdong and Guo Suwei, and then Lin Zhan, we have been trying to use grave size and then how many days it must have taken to construct each particular grave as a way to measure the amount of possible wealth each buried must have had, in addition to adding together all the grave goods, in particular the amount of time to make each grave goods. So we use this alternative way to compute the wealth inequality at each given point in time for each given region, and then examine how that has evolved over time as a way to study the impact of socio-economic as well as technological development on wealth inequality and social inequality. I know, as another example, some of you may be interested in the history or the prehistory and the history of gender inequality. So for that, I've worked with a former student, Zhang Xiaoming, to use two measures. One is human height for males and also for females. So for each different time periods, even starting from the Paleolithic period for China, we have been able to collect a relatively sizable number of estimates for human heights over different periods of time. And then we look at the ratio in height between males and females for each different periods of time to examine how the development of agriculture and other technological advancements may have impacted the gender inequality index and so on. And we also use age at death or lifetime estimates for males and females as a way to study the evolution of gender inequality and so on. Anyway, I'm reminded that there is only 3 minutes left. So let me stop here. So what I want to say is that depending on the research questions you want to address. So if you are creative enough and think hard enough, from our experience, you can almost always find some proxies, some quantitative proxies to measure each factor or each aspect you are interested in, and then use those proxies as ways to do hypothesis testing, to examine your hypothesis, and in particular the social, economic, political, institutional evolution from let's say 10,000 years ago to each different prehistoric time period, as well as later historical time periods. So let me stop here. So I want to thank Professor Li for doing such a wonderful job and showing us all the interesting developments in archaeological work on China. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you for your patience. Any questions, Dr. Liu?
I'm sorry,
don't
I'm
see
muted.
questions in
Yeah,
the chat.
we have one question from Ren Xiaopeng. Is there more evidence to support your insightful classification of Longshan society, highland versus lowland? And do you want to give a quick response to that?
The question would be the Kong Sanzuqi, so the hollow legs construction. So yeah, it's when you look at Taosi in the Jinan Basin, its ceramic assemblage is much closer related to Shimao and the Lost Highland than, say, with the Henan area. So all classifications, as I said in the lecture, is a tool. It has to follow your archaeological purpose. So that term is Highland Longshan Society is designed to put Taosi and Shimao in the same category.
Okay, so if we don't have any other further questions, then this will be the end of today's Quantitative History webinar. So Yeah, before we left, let me just do a quick announcement here. So for the next talk, we will have Professor Eric Wong to deliver on this topic, Twilight of the Medieval Chinese Aristocracy, Keju, Office Holding, and Assortative Mating in the Tang period. Right, so let me again give a very thankful remark to Professor Li Ming for this wonderful presentation, and I think Zhu is really excited to see this work coming out, and he has really a lot of insightful comments, and looking forward to further research and even collaborations between these different type of interdisciplinary studies. Right, and also many thanks for Zhu for his comments. Yeah, so and thanks everyone for joining us online today. It's really great to see people here and to listen to this talk. So yes, thank you everyone, and looking forward to see you next time.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Li. Yeah.
Thank you.